Behaviours is where we need to anchor our response to anything like this. And I'm not advocating for throwing the microphones and the telephones around the office, but I am advocating for standing up for what you believe in. Empower your leaders, empower your managers, give them the skills to make decisions and allow them to lead their teams. Don't see yourself as not good enough, but recognise that if you're going to grow, you've also got to be uncomfortable.
We are trying to answer one of the most difficult possible things. The human reaction between your team members at any commercial company is almost what defines it long term. I've recently been in meetings where it's venture capitalists with founders, where it's joint ventures of multiple companies coming together, or just companies that are struggling. And more often than not, it's the dynamic between the individuals. We are very happy to say we have got Claire, who is the chair of the Association of Business Psychology. And today, Claire is going to go through many of these areas. And we'd just love to welcome you, Claire, to the Wolfe Power Club podcast.
Thank you for having me, Alex. It's really great to be here.
Today, we're going to look at business. So I'm going to jump straight into, I think, one of the things that a lot of people will be thinking about as they listen to us going to work right now is, what are the dysfunctional behaviours you see in leadership teams? Because I've been in multiple boardrooms. Some have been wonderful, but some is probably the time where you started going on Indeed looking for your next role because there's dysfunctional behaviours. What, from your experience, do you see in leadership teams when there are dysfunctional behaviours?
I think it's a really great question, Alex. And I think that behaviours is where we need to anchor our response to anything like this. It usually stems from some kind of a lack of self-awareness, poor communication, or just an inability to adapt. And I think some of the most difficult things that I see are, for example, siloed thinking, or paralysis over decision making, or that kind of we used to call it on one of the boards I was on, that glitter ball effect. Like people would run towards the next project without taking a moment, taking a beat to say, should we be doing this? Is this in the best interest of the organisation? Because sometimes we're so ambitious, we don't take a moment to think. There's also that line between micromanagement and abdication. How do people walk down a middle line that means that they don't control excessively, but they also don't step back and create a lack of direction? And I think to address that kind of dysfunction, you need a real focus on leadership development. You need a focus on coaching. You need to create an open and accountable culture. But one of the best boards that I ever worked on, which was with a wonderful guy called Jerry McHugh, CEO in financial services, we would step into the boardroom and we would argue, all of us. All of us would argue. And I think sometimes people are afraid of having healthy challenge and healthy debate, because we could go in there, argue the point, get to where we needed to be, come out with well thought out decisions where we'd heard everybody in the room, but then we're able to come out and create a vision and a journey for the rest of the organisation that was based on having rooted out all of the issues between us. And I think sometimes people are afraid to argue. You need to have healthy debate.
I think actually in some of the most dysfunctional sort of meetings or environments I've been, it's almost that passive aggressive behaviour, which I think is classic in England.
Yeah.
And the reason I say it's classic in England, when I was in Netherlands, people are very direct. They will say stuff like, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this. I agree with that, I disagree with that. Whereas I find quite often, certainly in difficult times, a lot of people don't like to raise their voice, or they say, I totally understand, or I'll try my best at that. And normally that's code for, I'm not going to go near there and do that, but I'll let you down in 4 weeks' time.
Yeah. And I'm not advocating for, throwing the microphones and the telephones around the office, or beating each other with your laptops, but I am advocating for standing up for what you believe in and making sure that you explore every option when you've got difficult challenges, particularly in the current landscape with what's going on in business at the moment. And I have an employment focus because I've got a HR and a business psychology background. Things like the Worker Protection Act and the challenges that organisations are facing. Um, it's important to create an environment that's psychologically safe, but psychologically safe to argue and debate.
And an area I'm really interested in is sort of a high performing energy within a company. And I sort of bit rose tinted glasses here, but I was in a team, almost, well, it's crazy to think that it's over 16 years ago now, but we've got a little reunion dinner. We have a reunion dinner every year, International Energy Week. And I was in a company, don't mind name dropping them, Mabanath, between 2009 and 2011. And that team had unbelievable energy. Not only did we achieve great stuff, but what's fascinating to see is that sort of group of us all then went on to really senior roles. And it's quite funny. It's a little bit like a who's who of downstream directors, but we all had a very enjoyable time. That was incredible high energy. And I was just wondering, like, what do you think, therefore, sort of looking at the more positive ways, is some of the good times you've seen high energy created and sort of practices to achieve that? Because I can't explain how it happened, but I do know, looking
Yeah,
backwards, it was
yeah.
there, and we all did great things and really drove each other to unbelievable successes.
And sometimes it's that there's a bit of serendipity there of bringing the right people together to create that magic ingredient, isn't there? But I think if you're looking for principles that you need to stick to, if I reflect on a time when there's been high energy around a piece of work or transformation that I've done, at one organisation that I worked in, we were looking at a big program of activity about what the future of work would look like post pandemic, and we were coming off the back of a huge period of change where we had very much relied on our people to, literally pack up their desks, go home, and continue to work for us because we were doing a lot of work. We were, on the mortgage rescue scheme, so we'd asked a lot of our people, and it was actually going out and asking the people what they wanted the future of work to look like, and speaking to people and taking on board their feedback on what they really wanted about the future of work, that changed a narrative. And the feedback from that particular project, people said, I've never felt so connected as I have to the organisation as I do right now, and it's because you came out and spoke to me individually. And what I found really remarkable in that was that I expected the responses to that piece of research and that piece of work to be about, what time people started, where they were working, very, very transactional elements about the way that work was structured. But they all talked about connections. Everybody talked about connections. They started to talk about, and particularly if you think about that time post pandemic when we'd all been making banana bread in our kitchens and waving out the window and ringing bells and things, people were very focused on connections, but it actually brought out something that's really true for people. That team that you worked with, you had great connections with each other. So what we had was people talking about having clubs, having opportunities to meet up. And the focus really needed to be on making the workplace a destination where you could collaborate and work effectively, but not make it transactional. So I think when you want to get those teams that are working, in a really high performing state, it's around that clarity of purpose. What's your mission? How do you resonate with your employees and your stakeholders? How do your employees know what it's okay to be the smallest cog in the machine, but know what your cog is, know how important it is, and make sure that everybody understands that. Um, empower your leaders, empower your managers, give them the skills to make decisions and allow them to lead their teams, be accountable, let them have that. I think that the best thing, the gift that you can give to your leaders in your organization is empowerment so that they can lead their areas.
One thing that I see as quite a commonality, and you kind of also see it in sport as well, is this concept of imposter syndrome. And I know a lot of people discuss imposter syndrome. And I was just wondering, how do you get around imposter syndrome? For our listeners who aren't sure what imposter syndrome is, the sort of normal classic of it is that a person has a very high position or job title, but internally they just don't feel that they're worthy of it, don't feel they should be in that position, and actually it creates a huge personal stress that probably people don't understand. And I know, for instance, with friends of mine, almost one of the things that's helped imposter syndrome is by talking to peers. But I was just wondering, from your experience, how do you avoid imposter syndrome? Because it's normally quite natural, I would have thought, in a new role, new environment, or new responsibility.
So I'm going to throw this one back and say I wouldn't avoid imposter syndrome. I need to lean into that as a superpower, and I would encourage people to understand what imposter syndrome is and use that as a way of driving yourself forwards. So the people that scare me the most, in the boardroom or in any position of power, are the ones that don't have imposter syndrome. Because if I'm sitting in a room with someone who absolutely believes they're the smartest person in the room, absolutely believes that they should be in charge of everything, they're probably dangerous. you know we all need to have moments of self-doubt. Now, we can't let it take us over, but we also need to acknowledge where our failings might be. Every day since I became the chair of the ABP, I think to myself, oh my God, should I really be in this position? Am I the right person? And actually, I take that energy and use it to focus on how I can do better and how I can be ambitious. So we do need to, I think, normalize that experience. And if I give you an example, I'm going to name check one of my sons here, so he'll probably kill me. But he's in his 20s and he's working now. But we're a big judo family. I mentioned to you when we were at the tennis. So we've been involved in judo many years. Both my sons have absolutely loved it. The first competition that my oldest son went to, he got hit in the ear. He was crying. He didn't really believe that he should be there. He was very, very timid. And we realized that we had a bit of a confidence issue with this child. But he loved judo. He wanted to get out and compete. So we had to really build him up and kind of get a bit of self-belief into him. So, we were almost creating a bit of a Charlie Big Potatoes on the way to competition, saying, you can do this, you can do this, you're the best, you've trained really hard, you're fabulous, you're ready for this is your day. And you had to walk a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And it was interesting, actually, because he went out to we worked really hard on this, and he really built his confidence, and he was doing really well. And he wanted to start doing ranking events. He did the ranking events, and he was very quickly the #1 cadet in the UK, which was fantastic. He'd done well. He went out to the British Championships in Sheffield, and he stepped onto the mat. We all thought he would win. He thought he would win. Someone stepped out that no one had ever seen before and beat him in about 20 seconds. It was just excruciating. It was brutal. And it was a real moment, really, actually, because this is a kid that maybe we had pushed too far to get rid of imposter syndrome. He walked out onto the mat like Charlie Big Potatoes and got absolutely thrown for Ippon in seconds. But it was a really good lesson for him. So sometimes you do need to be taken down a peg or two. You need to take a moment to reflect. And he went away and he worked really hard on what his balance was, where he was going to challenge himself. And he literally didn't lose another competition for the rest of the year. And he ended up, as a result, going to the Youth Commonwealth,
Wow.
which was a phenomenal experience for a kid of that age at 17, all expenses paid, representing England. They went to the Bahamas that year. So, I mean, wonderful. So I suppose what I'm coming back to really is reframe the narrative around imposter syndrome. Don't see yourself as not good enough, but recognize that if you're going to grow, you've also got to be uncomfortable. Focus on value rather than perfection. None of us is going to be perfect, and no one is perfect. And even the people that you really admire, they're not perfect, and they're doubting themselves sometimes too. don't believe that to be a leader you have to have all the answers, but give clarity, be curious, have integrity in the way that you respond to people. The best leaders I know will say, do you know what, I don't know the answer to that. I can't give you an answer, or I'm not able to give you an answer, but as soon as I can, I will come back to you. Um, and then I think it's coaching and mentoring, and finding trusted friends, finding people that you look up to in the organization, get that perspective on what your imposter syndrome really is. Is it a healthy challenge of yourself? Are you being your own best critic, or are you beating yourself up? But normalize that experience.
I think what's interesting then is we go on to another subject I think is very closely to related to trust, is this idea of both a mentally happy and mentally stable environment. And the reason I raise that is that I've been to two industry events recently that kind of blew my mind. One was venture capitalists and founders, and literally I heard an hour of the troubles, the difficulties, and there was a lot of actual strain on their faces as they're talking to us. And then last night I was at the Scottish Energy Forum, listening about joint ventures and the high probability of failures in joint ventures. And the one thing that was really missing was happiness. I actually raised the question on both meetings, like, when do we get to the stage of like mentally happy? And I think when I was reflecting back on my own life, it also normally is at times of stability, and actually both those industry events at times of often a lot of non-stability. Either it's big growth or big investment or big divergent. And I was just wondering, what is a good thing to build on in addition to trust to almost create a happy and stable environment?
Yeah.
Because it seems so often an afterthought after profit or return on capital
I
or so on.
really, yeah, and it's a mistake to make it an afterthought, isn't it? Because you can have the best tech in the world, you can have the best product in the world, but your asset, your greatest asset, is your people. So why are you not looking after them? I do think that related to trust, you've got this piece around communication and understanding what's going on, and when you've got a vacuum of communication, only bad things grow in that space. Rumor, uh, conjecture, fear, because people don't understand what's going on. So it does kind of come back again to, it's creating that psychologically safe space. It's making well-being a strategic priority for an organization. It's not a nice to have. And actually, research shows that your return on investment on well-being activity it is phenomenal. It's literally money making for your organization. There's been numerous pieces of research that have found that. But critically, when organizations are going through those times of change, it's got to be around leadership role modeling. So often you see people trying to prove that they're the hardest working in the room. They need to prove that they've got the best balance and that they understand the challenges that people have in the workplace. And I do think that we sometimes forget. There seems to be this expectation that people will turn up at work. They be, a bit like the Severance program. I don't know whether you've seen that series. They become a worker, and their outside life is completely removed. And actually, we've got so many things going on. People have got caring responsibilities, elderly relatives. They may have challenges in their relationship, or sick kids and things like that. And we need to recognize the whole human being. So that kind of leadership role modeling is really important, showing people that it's okay to prioritize your well-being. It sets a tone for the organization. Having really clear expectations, giving people autonomy, but communicating so much more than you think you need to. I think everywhere people under communicate. You need to tell people again and again and again and make sure that people know, because we've all been, and I bet you have as well, Alex, a team stand up, maybe the annual presentation from the CEO, and they'll give the whole update. And then you open up to questions, and someone will ask something that is just so ridiculous because they've missed it. So they'll say, oh, well, I don't know why we haven't got water coolers on the third floor or something. And you have to say, well, look, as per the 3 emails that went out, the company newsletter, the 4 posters that are up in the kitchen, and they still don't hear it. So you have to make sure that you are role modeling every single opportunity you've got. You cascade all of the information that you can, and you create that again, position of trust.
And I'm just interested, how you cope with a very difficult situation where you can't necessarily have a starting point of best practice. You're suddenly in a situation due to financial must, or the decisions at maybe a shareholder level, you're suddenly in there. I was just wondering, sort of merger and acquisition, how you bring two companies together in a very challenging situation like that.
I think that yeah, really, really challenging. I mean, I challenged the fact that a dinner was held and that everybody was just lumped in together like some kind of uh, black tie fight club that they were expecting to happen. I worry about that. I really do. It's really tough. When it's an acquisition, it can be a bit easier. But I mean, even I've had experience of an acquisition that with the best laid plans started to go south almost at the first conversation. The CEO and I went to meet the affected staff that would be joining our firm, and gave reassurance, talked all about our organisation. So everything was done right, early, transparent communication, seeking to get rid of any uncertainty that would fuel fear. Talk about our organisation, our values, and the critical message: all of your jobs are safe. We have capacity for you. We need you in order to carry on running the organisation. The message was really, really strong. And then the leader at the organisation that was being acquired stood up at the end of this great presentation that we thought we'd done brilliantly at, and said, well, in light of this devastating news, we're going to let everyone go home early. And the CEO and I that were doing the presentation were just looking at each other thinking, what was devastating? We don't understand. We've said your jobs are safe. We're going to match your benefits. We're going to carry everything on. We've told you about who we are. We've done a really great sales pitch. Um, they're as much about culture as they are about commercial value. And if you don't go in with an eye on culture right from the beginning, there's a lot of work to be done to look at commerciality. But the biggest mistake is assuming that trust will naturally develop. You've got to go in there, you've got to win hearts and minds, and you've got to give reassurance. And if there are going to be job losses, you've got to bring your human. And again, to my earlier point, communicate, communicate, communicate. Because as soon as you go quiet, and this is what often happens, you're doing a merger and acquisition, everyone retreats to the boardroom and starts trying to work something out. All of the people outside, do you think they've stopped talking? Do you think that they just carried on, carried on as normal? That, little worms underground. No, they didn't. They're all talking to each other. They're in the toilets, they're in the canteen, and they've made up a whole new truth. And 100 times out of any situation, it will be an awful truth, and it will be so much worse than the actual truth. So I think it's really important to bring your human, acknowledge the cultural differences, look for your cultural architects as well. There will be people in both organisations that are what I would call cultural architects. They're the people that can shape a vision and take people with you. So you need to get into both organisations, get under the skin of it and look for them.
I think it's a great point you said there. I think two things I've really just taken from your thing. One, don't assume job safety is a real positive news, because I have a good friend who was at a failing Swiss bank for a long time, and he was basically telling me there was a whole team of people just waiting for that redundancy
Yes,
check.
this is
And
what
as you
these
said,
people were. They were hoping, and they had insurance as well. They had insurance, so I think at least two people in that room wanted to leap across the desk and just punch me in the face, because they were so ready for their redundancy. But the thing is, go in and have those conversations. I mean, after that particularly difficult meeting, I ended up and I had a horrendous few months meeting everybody individually, and it was very much a cards on the table. What are you hoping for? What did you want to get out of it? So that we understood who definitely wanted to leave, because some people were just like, no, I was really hoping for redundancy. Okay, let's take this away and have a look, because you there has to be genuine redundancy. You can't run a redundancy if there isn't a genuine redundancy. But if someone is desperate to leave, then what can you do to offer them a graceful exit if that's what they want? There's no point having someone in your organisation who doesn't want to be there. No point at all.
so I can really indulge into this guy called Kevin Coote. And so a lot of my career, I've managed large teams of drivers. And it's fair to say the guy in the suit from business school, aka me, and the drivers, the starting point of don't listen to the guy in the suit. And you need I'd call it like an ally.
It's an ally. You're absolutely right.
And Kevin was absolutely brilliant. I'll just tell a little story because I think actually our listeners like that. So, background to Kevin, he was kind of, even if not officially, but I think even sometimes officially, he was like the sort of shop steward of the drivers. But what was good was because sometimes you have shop stewards that the drivers also don't like they see that person causing trouble for them and so on. But he was very pragmatic. He would listen to senior management and, as you say, convert it into a really good message in the smoking break behind the porter cabins, and it would get. But I never forget one of the funniest moments was a driver had done an action that was basically a dismissal event, and as the shop steward, they would always take Kevin into the meeting, and the porter cabin at the time had such thin walls, there was no such thing as when you left the room you could hear it. And anyway, without going into too much detail what happened, let's say it was an event that basically was a sort of automatic dismissal. Anyway, so it was on CCTV, the offence. It was shown to the driver in this porter cabin, and we left, and I just heard Kevin turn to the guy. He was like, "Mate, I know you want to keep your job, but they have no options here. You have no options here. Your only option is to resign, and trust me, you'll get a job down the road, but you just have to resign as soon as they walk back in the room." The guy goes, "I resign." It always cracked me up, that. And I was just like, that's the power, though, of someone who understands his audience. And very sadly, Kevin was taken from us too young with cancer. But I remember, I don't think I've ever been to a funeral before where someone literally had, from the board down to the apprentice to the hundreds of drivers there. And I think that basically was because he had a career of where he'd been a cultural architect, in that he kind of knew the pressures in the boardroom, but also what someone in the smoking break behind the porter cabins wanted to hear. And it was like an amazing quality that, as I say, is so rare to find. And yeah, just remind me of that, of a real life cultural architect.
That story that you've just shared, what Kevin gave to the driver was dignity. And I think that for me, that's really powerful. He gave the driver the opportunity to take control of his situation by laying out the facts for him, and in a measured way, so that he could go in and say, right, I'm going to resign, rather than going through a whole process of maybe unraveling whatever he'd done. And so often I see in those kind of critical situations where people create too much space, and then an individual who is ultimately going to lose their job thinks they've got a chance and tries to fight for it. And that's humiliating. So what Kevin did was give that man a moment of dignity so that he could resign and pretty much walk straight into another job. I love that. And I love it when people have the insight to be able to offer that chance to people.
Now, going on to sort of more reflection on your career, is what would you have told your younger self? Now you've seen, and I think because you've been so involved with the human interaction, trust values, non-executive board positions now, associations of different, what would you have told your younger self maybe when you were in those school years?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've got two sons who are now at the start of their careers, and I realise that the advice I give to them is very different to what I would have given to myself at the time. So my advice to my younger self, one is, I didn't really get networking when I was younger. I didn't really understand it. I just thought you go in and you just do your job, and if you do your job really well and do a great job, you probably will progress. Actually, now I realise that networking needs to be done with purpose, and relationships do open doors that technical skills alone can't. So I would tell my younger self to network really well, get out there, get to conferences, connect with people on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is wonderful, isn't it? Because you can have a huge community. It's wonderful and it's awful in many ways, isn't it? So, I don't like the 20 messages a day I get asking me to buy something, but I do love those really genuine connections that I can make with people who are interested in the same things that I am. I also think that I would have, I think I was a little bit, because of my upbringing and where I'd come from, and I came from a difficult socioeconomic background, although I've continued to study all my life and I've got to a really great position now. I lacked confidence and I did suffer in a bad way with imposter syndrome. So in many ways, it made me ambitious and it drove me forward. So, I went back to university. I got my master's. I went and did my FCOPD. I got my fellow with the COPD and with the ABP, and I've continued, and I'm still studying today. I keep saying I'm not doing any more after this one, but I carry on. But the confidence issue meant that I didn't necessarily say yes to opportunities as soon as I should have done. And I would say yes to an opportunity before you think you're ready, because actually growth comes from stretching yourself. Stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone, because then you will grow. And try and make ground early in your career. I also hung around in organisations sometimes for too long, in the belief that loyalty would help me progress, and that loyalty isn't always repaid. I believe in being absolutely loyal to a firm, but as I'm older now, I'm loyal to myself as well. And so that's the advice that I give to my kids is, look at be objective about this and think, what are your prospects? What are the opportunities? And do you need to move to another firm in the future if there are better opportunities? So I ask them to be ruthless in that pursuit of progression. And I think don't expect yourself to be perfect. If we look back on ourselves when we were, 20 something going into careers, that kind of pursuit of perfection, I think it's the enemy of success, isn't it? It doing something well is better than just getting it perfect every time. Iterating, learning. I think I did a talk a few years ago for International Women's Day, and I was asked to come in and basically talk about, being a successful woman. And I just, oh God, well, am I just going to stand up there and say, I'm better than you because of all of these things? And this is how awesome I am. And I really didn't like it. Do you know what I mean? I'd been asked because I was a leader in the business. I just thought, what right does this give me? So there was a bit of imposter syndrome, but it gave healthy challenge. So I ended up doing a talk that was called How to Be a Big Fat Failure. And I stood up and I told them all the times that I had failed at something and what I learned from it. So every single time I'd made a complete fool of myself, I'd made a mistake or I'd made a bad decision, we unwrapped it in that session and looked at what I'd learned from it and how it pushed me forwards, because failure is not the end. It's like the Samuel Beckett, fail better, fail better, fail again, fail better.
On the LinkedIn point, though, I will give a quick shout out to please everyone follow us on LinkedIn. We put some really interesting content on LinkedIn. Obviously, this is on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, TikTok. But what I'd also like to, just before we go quick fire questions, Claire, I think it's been some unbelievable insight today. I know that you do some non-exec positions and you go into organisations. How can people stay in touch with you, and how can people potentially use your services if they're currently in the marketplace looking for an expert like yourself?
Oh, thanks, Alex. Just link up with me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Claire Lish on LinkedIn because it's a bit of a weird name, and I'd love to hear from people. My email address is claire@Psynergy, Psynergy consulting.org. I'd love to hear from people. My favourite thing is going into organisations and unravelling issues, but I also do retained HR. Redundancies, as we've said, I'm brilliant at them, but I promise you that your people will hug me on the way out if I do have to let them go for you. That sounds really ruthless, but I am a much nicer person than that seems. I promise.
Quick fire questions that we ask all our guests. So the first one is, who's the most relevant person in your contact book that we should think about for a future episode?
Gosh, there's a lot of people that are inspiring me at the moment. I would say one of them is the Vice President of the Association for Business Psychology, Dr. Dawn Nicholson. She's phenomenal. She's doing a lot of work with students, and she runs the BizPsych Cup, which is a competition where organisations can put a real world challenge to masters and undergraduate students, and they will take it away as a project and deliver an APA style poster back to that organisation. Phenomenal experience for the students to get themselves in front of organisations, but also phenomenal for the companies to tout future talent for, organisational design, business psychology, training, learning and development, psychometrics. So I love the work that she's doing, amplifying that student journey, because we've got to grow our talent and we've got to look after the world of workforce experience. So what she's doing is brilliant. I'm also a massive fan of John Amici, who wrote The Promises of Giants. Love his work. And Bruce Daisley, who wrote The World of Work. Love his work, and I've seen both of them speak quite recently, and just great keynotes.
Where do you think the energy industry should be investing? I presume in something people related.
Yeah, I'm going to say I think that we need to engage with educational resources and make sure that we push forward on sustainable behaviours. So that would be where my interest is in. I think there should be an investment in making sure that people understand the choices that they're making. From a perspective of investment within organisations, I think your people are your greatest asset. It doesn't matter what your product is. It doesn't matter how great your technology is. It's your people. So if you're an organization and you want to know where you should be investing, invest in your people every single time. And if we're talking industry, I think we need to make sure that people are better informed, as in the public.
This quickfire question is normally about what the government should do on energy policy, but because so much is being talked about worker policy, worker rights at the moment, I was just wondering, in the next 12 months, what you think the government should try and aim to do with some of these reforms?
I think we need to be alive to the impact that the Worker Protection Act will have, just alone in terms of the employee costs for smaller organisations that may find a challenge, and that will have impacts on the way in which they treat their people. So I get it, it's about protecting the workers, but if the cost becomes too high, it will result in loss of jobs. And it means that people are not being able to make the best decisions in the interests of the culture of their organisation.
Fantastic. I think that's a lovely place to end today's podcast. I think, guys, Claire has shown us that whatever changes in the world of the workplace, that idea of trust between individuals, over communication almost, and that art of actually walking the walk. I think loads of us can probably reflect on our own career of both when we have and haven't done that. And certainly the big one I'm taking away today is the culture architect. And as we said, it could be at any level, from the front desk to the likes of your Kevin in the smoking area, to the likes of actually the chief executive who's quite humble and rather has embraced imposter syndrome rather than thinking that he can do everything and win everything, he or she. So Claire, I'd love to thank you for the time. You've been an excellent guest on the Wolfe Power Club, and as I say, guys, in the show notes we will put Claire's email and LinkedIn contact, so if you'd like Claire to turn around your organisation or just build on what's fantastic right now, bring her in. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Alex.